our guests cancel, which is totally fine because then I get to talk about some of the cool things that I like to talk about. I have been working a lot in other practices, other medical practices, and I'm seeing a lot of, lots and lots of immune dysfunction. And we call it that. I want to get into that a little bit. Why is it dysfunctional or is it not? But there is a situation that many of you, I'm sure, have heard of called histamine intolerance. And so I want to jump into that and talk a little bit about that, what we're looking at as far as what that means, where it's coming from, why is it happening, what's the body trying to tell us. But of course, first and foremost, we want to start with gratitude. I do truly believe gratitude can change the world. And if anything, it can change each of us individually. Being in a place of gratitude for anything, right now I'm looking outside, it's a little cloudy. That's okay because it's a beautiful day outside, right? Even though I appreciate the sun, I love the sun, but the clouds are good too. So, there's so many things that we have in life to be grateful for, friends, family, experiences, the hardships, right? It's the hardships that teach us. So I am super grateful for, I think right now, just this place that I am in life, right? I've been doing a lot of, reflection on how I approach what I do in my work, in my approach and what I do with my patients and my clients, with those who I am collaborating with. And, there are a lot of things that can be really great, but at the same time, really difficult. And I think for me, I'm grateful to want to lean into that because I know that everything that I'm doing right now is exponential growth. And that's a great place to be. It might be hard, right? But it is amazing growth and it's all so good. I'm learning so much. I've been practicing, now for 10 years and I'm constantly going to conferences and, doing continuing education, these things to help me stay at the front of all the things that are going on. Now, a lot of things that I don't know, certainly, but I do my best to really look at all the new things that are coming up, all the new research and the data, and then apply it where I can apply it. But there's a lot of things that I'm seeing that are hard to manage, right? And so that leads me now into what I'm seeing a lot right now, and I saw it a significant amount before, but right now it's just constant. So it's this histamine overload, this histamine intolerance. You might also hear the term mast cell activation syndrome. Those are two different things. There are some similarities, and one can play off of the other, but they are two different things. Thank you. So, anyway, I want to dive into this because, what we're often blaming our body, or we blame the food. And it's what I believe to be my role, and then of course my goal, when there's a little bit of this detachment maybe, is to sort of rework that a little bit, right? Is it your body fighting back? Is it the food that's the problem? Is it your, gut dysfunction that's a problem? Now, there are lots of layers to this, right? And so not everybody's going to be the same. But what I want to do is sort of rewind that a little bit and say, what if, instead of looking at the body trying to fight us, what if the body is being protective? I say this a lot because I fully believe that it's true. It's giving you what it knows how to give you, to keep you alive. Its ultimate goal, for me, for everybody else, is to keep us alive. And so when we start to experience symptoms, pain, histamine responses, which is like an allergic reaction, right? That's kind of how you see it. It's you think of hives, but you can think of headaches, again, GI stress, things like that. And you're trying to understand why, and you're thinking, I'm eating really healthfully, right? I eat blueberries, and I eat lemons, and I eat vegetables, and I eat healthy meat, and I eat fish, and I'm doing all of these things right. Why is my body screaming at me? So is it a red flag for the food, which your body's like, hey, I need your help? And this is like in my mind, I picture things, and I picture the body as it gets to this point to where its bucket is starting to overflow, and it can't handle it on its own anymore. It's this knock on the door, knock on you with these symptoms, going, hey, I need you to jump in here because something is not going right. And kind of like with an airplane, there's so many redundancies. So if something goes wrong, something else kicks in. I believe the body is much more complex, obviously, than an airplane, but that's how an airplane runs. I heard that one time. I was like, that helps. It's nice to know that there are redundancies. So if something happens, something else is going to pick up the slack. And I that's what happens. It goes on, constantly in the body. It's there's a red flag or a problem that goes wrong, or cells that are dividing or dying when they're not supposed to, and things like that, and something else comes in to pick up the slack to keep the body alive. And so the body's ultimate goal is to keep us alive. So we have to start to learn, if we don't already, how to listen, what that means, and what it is that we can do then to manage and allow and give the body what it needs to be able to not overreact with things if you're eating citrus, right? So knowing that symptoms are the body talking to us, let's just kind of dig in a little bit as we move through the process of what it looks like, to try to uncover what is the root cause of something like histamine intolerance. So we want to look at it as it's a symptom, right? It's not a condition. It's not a disease, right? It's a symptom, and it's the body saying, I've got too much going on, and I'm gonna really bring it to the forefront. I'm going to give you those highs. I'm going to show you that there's something going on because this is too much for me to handle or to do on my own. So anyway, what I want to make sure that it's funny, I've gone through most of my notes already. Anyway, so there are a couple of things, that we can, so many things play off of each other. And that's why it can be sometimes difficult to really truly understand the root cause, because there can be multiple root causes. There are multiple factors involved in pretty much everything that we're struggling with, right? And so we have what most of us have heard the term leaky gut. And so leaky gut doesn't just happen on its own. Leaky gut happens due to, it can be alcohol intake, it can be gluten, it can be dairy, it can be over-the-counter drugs, right? It can be stress, it can be high sugar diet, right? So essentially leaky gut happens because there's I think it's a protein called zonulin, and zonulin, when it's totally normal and natural to the body, but when zonulin is elevated, it pulls, so you've got these cells that are supposed to be super, super tight so nothing can get through. Well, it either pulls them apart from each other, or it can rip the cell apart, period. And so then what happens is you've got food and microbes and yeast and bacteria and toxins that get into the bloodstream too early. So even if it's food and it's normal and natural and we think it's fine, the body is going to see it as something that's coming in to attack, because it's not supposed to be there. It's too early, so the particles are too big in the bloodstream, so it goes on the defense. This is going to create an inflammatory response and can lead to many symptoms and conditions and on down the road. What happens, though, is there's an enzyme called DAO, and if you have been struggling with histamine intolerance, then you've probably heard of this enzyme. So DAO is produced in the lining of the gut. So DAO is intended to break down histamine in the gut. And so if you have leaky gut, you're not producing enough DAO, and so you don't have the DAO to break down the histamine, and then therefore you have a reaction, right? So essentially, you've got the gut inflammation that leads to immune activation, and then mast cell degranulation. And then so beyond that, then there can be what I don't know if I talk about it enough. I probably should do a show just on the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve, though, which can also play a role in leaky gut, you start, as I'm moving through this, you start to see that all of these things, I mean, we know this, but everything's connected. And so if our vagal tone is not as strong as it could be or should be, there's a lack of communication in our GI, right? The microbiome, which communicates with the brain via the vagus nerve. And if it's sluggish, and then our motility is going to be sluggish, which can increase an inflammatory response and buildup of toxins, and then leaky gut, right? And so we can do this a number of different ways that it plays on each other. But the vagus nerve is the nerve that attaches the brain and the gut. It also plays a big role in heart health and lung health, and again in motility. So if you're constipated, it's one of the first things that you want to think about. There are a lot of things that can go into that as well, but vagal tone is super important to the GI moving out the nutrients that we're taking in, and then eliminating what we don't need anymore and what's toxic, right? And so there are things that we can do to increase vagal tone, and it's the things that are like yoga and breath work and meditation and prayer. You can get if you want to stimulate it physically, you can get a hot pad and a massager, one of those vibrating massagers, and you can sit it right here on your belly, and it will help to stimulate your vagus nerve. The gag reflex. There are some people who just have no gag reflex. To me, that's really significant vagal tone dysregulation. And so we have these things that are, the vagus nerve really too is what is helping to put us in the parasympathetic, right? Which is the calm, the rest, the digest, right? So when we have nice, strong vagal tone, we are in parasympathetic. We have the ability to rest and digest, and we have the ability then also to break down the nutrients and utilize them. And so if we have weak vagal tone, then it is going to create more stress, put us in the sympathetic. It's going to impair digestion, and then as well as histamine tolerance, right? Again, so many different layers to this. So histamine also is kind of a neurotransmitter. So high histamines have the ability to affect brain function. So it can create anxiety, panic, sleep issues, right? And so there are multiple symptoms that can come along with histamine intolerance. We've got to start to peel the layers and figure out why. And then if we're going from leaky gut, we can go to, if your gut's on fire, your brain's on fire. And really, if your gut's on fire, your brain's on fire, your cardiovascular system is on fire, right? So you have this layer of cells that protects us in the endothelium and the epithelium. And so this layer, if it is pulled apart, it's going to allow things through that aren't supposed to. So that's going to happen with the blood-brain barrier. It's going to happen with our cardiovascular system. And so if that is the case in our cardiovascular system, and we don't have this protective barrier, or there's an inflammatory response and these cells are coming apart, this is when we have the ability for calcium and particles to build up and create plaque, which is protective, right? We have to remember these things. We may not want it there, but it's the body's way of protecting us when there is I'm going to call it a hole. It's not a hole, but it's damage. Get it right, Nikki. So if there's damage in that wall, it's going to go in, and it's going to protect that area with the calcium, with the extra calcium, with the buildup. And then if it's too much, obviously that's when we create problems, and we don't want that to happen. But going back to it, This leaky gut, leaky brain is just a systemic inflammatory response that can push, for some people who are prone to it, can push histamine intolerance. I think, though, if we're looking through this, we're looking through all of these different variables. Genetically, some people are more predisposed to certain conditions. So this whole thing that we just went through, this sort of gut, immune, nervous system, axis, if you want to call it. For some other people, it might lead to autoimmune disease. For other people, it might push on into mast cell activation syndrome, right? So it depends on what our potential is, and we'll dig in. Sorry, I had a call coming in. I should probably put my phone on do not disturb. But anyway, we'll get more into the genetics of it here in just a little bit. But the biggest thing is to remember that when the nervous system is in survival mode, that the body becomes reactive to everything. And so I hear a lot in when people come to me, I want to do a food sensitivity test. It seems that all of these foods I'm reacting to, and I can't figure out which ones, and I want to do a food sensitivity test. Don't get me wrong, I love food sensitivity testing. It gives us so much amazing information, but if I did a food sensitivity test on someone and that's the only thing that I did, and it came back and everything is red and yellow, then what's the response of that client or that patient going to be? Well, they're just going to be angry, and they're going to say, well, what the hell am I supposed to eat, and how do I manage this? So that's what I want to avoid. I want to avoid, people are already in a really frustrated state when they're not feeling well from whatever reason, right? Whether it's physical, mental, or emotional. When you're not feeling well, life just gets harder, right? It's already hard. It just gets harder. So I want to, in my mind, I want to be strategic about how I utilize food sensitivity testing. It can give us amazing information. It can tell us, about certain foods that are attacking, brain, that can create an autoimmune reaction to the brain, which can, inhibit brain function. I mean, these cool things that we can find out from it, but I want to be really careful with it, and I want to be super strategic with doing food sensitivity testing. It's an amazing tool. It's not the end all be all, right? And going back to it, if I'm looking at trying to understand the root cause of something, rarely is the root cause going to be food. Now, we might need to take out some food because we want to decrease the load on the nervous system and decrease the inflammatory reactions that are happening, just to help. But I'm not here also to make people miserable by saying, well, you can't eat anything but meat and broccoli, right? I mean, that doesn't help anybody. So anyway, it really, so much of this stuff, it depends on a client's or a patient's curiosity. It depends on budget. These types of tests are not covered by insurance, but they give us an amazing amount of information and can really give us some good guidance. So if we're moving on to environmental and emotional triggers. So this is interesting. I was, and it has stuck with me. Man, I love listening to people who are just super smart. I mean, it just makes me happy. And maybe one day I know some stuff, but maybe one day I'll be able to teach like some of these other people do, because it's really cool stuff. But one of the things, it sounds so simple, but I want anybody, if you're listening to this, to take this to heart, is that what is keeping us sick? Toxins, thoughts, and traumas, right? We can test for toxins. That's easy. But we have to make sure that we're taking into consideration the thoughts that we are talking to ourselves, or how we're talking outside to the rest of the world, right? How we experience life, what we think about things, and how we react to those situations that come at us, right? And then traumas. Most of the time, we can't do anything about trauma. That's why it's traumatic, because it wasn't expected. We didn't want it to happen. We didn't need it to happen, and it's now a part of who we are, and it's part of our structure. It's a part of our DNA, and then we pass it on, right? We pass our traumas on, and so if we're not able to manage these traumas in our own life, what's going to happen when we're passing them on to our kiddos? So again, not that it's our choice to be involved in traumatic situations, but it is our choice how we are going to deal with them, even if it's we don't know how to, and we find someone who helps us through it, because those are the things that keep us sick. And so we want to just, I hope that if you're hearing this, you keep that in mind and start to determine what it is that needs to be addressed in your health journey, because one of those things can perpetuate your situation. Um, so going back to what I specialize in is going to be the testing and the physical insults that are going to create a problem for us and that can push histamine intolerance. We are hearing, and it's amazing to me, there's mold everywhere. And so mold produces, mold that it's problematic produces what's called mycotoxins. And we can test for mycotoxins. We can get mycotoxins in food. We can get mycotoxins in our home, in our work environment. Some people are going to be more predisposed to the effects of mycotoxins than others. There are genetic variants that make us more predisposed to the effects of mycotoxin exposures. So we can have two people who live in a home that is full of mold. One of them is going to react, one of them is not. Doesn't mean the one who doesn't react is not going to create some kind of inflammatory response, but sometimes the mold just can really push this response, which can push things like histamine intolerance. It can push mast cell activation syndrome. It can push leaky gut. It can push pain and anxiety, and I mean, you name it, it can push it. So what are you predisposed to? It really just kind of depends, right? So we need to keep that in mind, because we in conventional medicine, and this is just what I've seen, okay, in conventional medicine, we can do some testing that is an immune response, and mold can be a part of that. It's called complement C4. It can give us an indication, but it doesn't break it down into where the mold is coming from and how not where it's coming from. We know what it is, right? So there are lots of different types of mold. And so when we know what type of mold it is, then we can start to say, is it coming from my food or my coffee or the bread that I'm eating, or is it coming from exposure in my home, which is this black mold that's really significant, or from my office, or wherever the case may be. I have multiple clients and patients right now who are struggling with this. You get out of the home, things get better, but how do you leave your home? And it's a hard situation to deal with. But having the awareness that, and having a timeline. I'm always working with people based off of a timeline. And so if somebody says, I had these symptoms that came up and this is when they started, we start talking about what was going on at that time. And very often we can start to pick apart whether it was a trauma or a toxin or thoughts, right? That at that point that was experienced, that we can start to say, okay, it's another layer that we're starting to peel. So I think it's really important to keep that in mind, because they're super toxic. And just because you leave the home or you stop eating that food doesn't mean that it goes away, which is also a problem. It will sit and it will perpetuate. You have to remove it therapeutically, right? There are binders, there are supplements that help to pull out these molds and kill them so they're not continually creating an insult on your body. You can feel better when you leave the environment, but also we can't go in and manage mold when you're at least not well when you're sitting in the environment at the same time. So we've got to do both at the same time. It's not easy for most people. It's a tough one for sure. So there are also chemical exposures. Think of the fragrances. This is the thing that kills me. So I had a client come in who is a teacher or principal or something, and so what her teachers were doing in the classes we're putting in these air fresheners, right, the plug-ins, that are amazingly toxic. They're so, so bad. And so you have these kids, I mean, it's these multiple insults from all of these different, places. You know, the terrible food that's in our school systems, the dyes and the toxins and the cleaning agents, and then you have the fragrances, because we want to make it smell good, and they're so damaging. It's no wonder that our kids can't focus. It's no wonder that they're sitting there, not learning and jumping off the walls and not behaving, because they can't go outside as often as they should. They can't run it off. They can't get fresh air, and they're being inundated with toxins. So I don't know how to manage that, and it's not my, that piece of the puzzle is not my world when it comes to kids and school systems and the politics around it, and that kind of thing. But my hope is that, especially now that we have somebody like RFK who has the understanding of what we're doing to our kids in our school systems, that this is going to be more front of mind for people, right? So if you are parents, think about this with your kids. We don't always know, and teachers don't know, so I'm not blaming the teachers, but I created a handout to give to this principal so she could give it to her teachers, so there's an understanding of what this is doing. It's not hard to find. I mean, these things are super toxic. So they're neurotoxic, they're all of it. So it's just it's tough. So, but we've got, going back to the cleaners. What are we cleaning our homes with? What are we cleaning our clothes with and our dishes with, right? Just get some vinegar and water and some essential oils, right? I mean, and maybe a little bit of what's it called, Castile soap, right? You put that together, you've got a cleaner, and it's a great cleaner. And so we can avoid these massive toxins that are impacting our kids, impacting our endocrine system, our hormones, our liver, everything, and take that burden off. So it goes back to, if we have so many of these things, people have their limit. Some people's bucket may be really, really big. Other people's bucket might be really small, depending on, different situations, genetics, you name it, exposures. But once that bucket starts to overflow, that's when we have things like histamine intolerance that can come in, and the body's starting to yell, starting to get really angry. Going back to, our trauma and emotional stress, they can trigger inflammation and, of course, immune hypersensitivity. So if you know you have a history of trauma, if you know that you're having some emotional stuff you're going through, being aware of that, finding help for it. What can you do to get out of the situation? What can you do to help to manage the trauma that you experienced in the past, or the trauma that you're experiencing now, right? So trauma and emotional stress are going to push inflammation, which are going to push that toxic bucket overload, right? And so the limbic system, which is our emotional brain, can sit and just be trapped in the body. So it just creates that sort of reactivity loop. So just having that in mind with the mental and the emotional strain. And so cortisol dysregulation, going back to, again, the mental and the emotional component of it, or disease symptoms, that's all stress in the body. So there's physical stress as well. The body just sees it as stress. Stress is stress is stress as far as the body's concerned. So cortisol dysregulation, which is the hormone released from the adrenal glands, which is your fight or flight, keeps you in sympathetic, and it keeps you just going, right, in overdrive. You're always in overdrive, and your body's not meant to always sit there and be in overdrive. So, but it specifically will reduce DAO, which is the enzyme that breaks down histamines. So it damages the gut lining, and then of course disrupts detox, and again with our cycles. So I think that it's important to note that if this is something that you're struggling with, that the body won't tolerate histamines well until it feels safe, right? It feels safe physically, mentally, and emotionally. Your nervous system is a huge role in this, in vagal tone, okay? Okay, so there are multiple enzymes that are involved in histamine breakdown. And so when we talk about enzymes, this is where the genetic variants come in, because the genetic variants are Enzymes. Enzymes are catalysts. So we think of enzymes as, what go in and break down food so we can absorb it and utilize it. And yes, that is obviously true. But enzymes, there are enzymatic reactions all over the body, and they're all catalysts. So they are pushing metabolic pathways to work and to function and to keep things moving and flowing and working properly, right? So we have DAO, so diamine oxidase. We have DAO that is the primary enzyme for breaking down extracellular histamine. So, right, that's the food that's coming in, and it comes in and breaks it down. It's produced in the small intestine. And so, again, if there's a damaged gut lining, it's going to lower DAO. So we're talking about zonulin and the things that can elevate zonulin, which can push leaky gut. Well, the things that can elevate zonulin can suppress DAO. So alcohol, antibiotics, inflammation, NSAIDs, high sugar diet, stress, right? It's not a good situation if you're lowering DAO and you're increasing zonulin. And so there are certain nutrients that can be required that if we're missing, are going to keep this process going, so moving along. So it's, copper, B6, vitamin C, things like that. So there's a lot more to it, right? It's, again, going back to what are we eating, how are we managing stress, are we sleeping, and the list goes on. There's another one called HNMT, so it's histamine N-methyltransferase, right? And so what this does is it breaks down intracellular histamine. So particularly in the brain, the liver, and the lungs. So it requires a couple of nutrients, SAMe, if you've heard of that. So it's acetyl-methionine, magnesium B2, and then methyl donors. So your B12, your folate, things like that. And so this can be really linked to your neurological symptoms, irritability, insomnia, hyperactivity. There are other things that can as well, but this a couple of those. So the HNMT clears the histamines that your body actually makes. So both of those are important, and we can have variants that can upregulate or downregulate both the breakdown and the clearance. And so knowing this is where, genetic testing or epigenetic testing is, or nutrigenomic testing, right? You call it these multiple different things, but can really help us to understand our body and our own makeup. I have one of my doctors, a friend of mine, I've had him on the show, Dr. Ben Bush. He's amazing, regenerative medicine. I really appreciate what he does. But he said one time that he always likes to tell people that there are no mistakes, right? This is just how we're made, and we work with how we're made. God doesn't make mistakes, and I appreciate that he said that so much. But it is absolutely true. God doesn't make mistakes. We are all created the way we are for a reason. But having the ability to do this testing to understand how we're made, so we can manage that and support it and grow from it, it's really amazing. So really cool testing out there with these things. So moving down, these genetic polymorphisms, which include DAO and HNMT. Genetic polymorphisms being, briefly, it's one of my favorite things in the world, but the epigenome is what sits on top of our genes, right? And so it's the epigenome that regulates gene expression. The epigenome is regulated by lifestyle, food, sleep, stress, trauma, all of those things that we're talking about is what's regulating the epigenome, what's regulating gene expression, right? So to break it down a little bit further, you have cardiovascular disease in your family. Your thought might be, and it is for a lot of people, that that's going to be me. I'm going to have cardiovascular disease, and that's what's going to take me out. That doesn't have to be the case, right? We make our choices every single day that impact our epigenome, which impacts gene expression. So it's accountability, but it's power. It's me knowing that I have the ability to mitigate what maybe my mom or my dad or whoever on down the line struggled with. I don't necessarily have to. I mean, we have those tools. It's by the decisions that we make, right? So if we move on down the line, so So one of the things, so like DAO, this enzyme, if there is an issue with that gene or that variant, sorry, it often is tied to gut symptoms and skin reactions. As far as the HNMT that we talked about, is often, you know, the mood swings, headaches, irritability, sleep issues, things like that. So you don't. The cool thing is, if we know these things, we don't necessarily have to do the testing. It's nice to know. It's an amazing tool, but we look at some of these symptoms, and maybe it might give us some indication as to where the issue needs to be addressed. MTHFR. So if you have heard of MTHFR, it might be the only thing that you've heard of, right? So that came to the forefront, you know, quite a few years ago. I think mostly by Ben Lynch, who does a lot of great work. But MTHFR is a variant of the many millions of variants that we have. So yes, it's an important one. It's important in fertility and methylation, and obviously in histamine, and so many things. It's really in homocysteine, right, which is an inflammatory marker. But it's not the only one out there. But it's a good one to know about, right? And there are sort of variants within that. And so what can happen with MTHFR is you can experience fatigue, anxiety, poor detox, hormonal imbalances. We've got the C677T and the A1298C. So C677T tends to be the one that's more of an issue, where the 1298C is less. But both can, you know, create some problems if we don't know that that's what we're dealing with, and that's how we're made, and how to address it, right? And so what it can do is slow down methylation, and I'm having a hard time now. Slows down methylation, reduces production of SAMe, which is acetyl methionine. Remember that. And weakens the HNMT activity. So it's kind of that loop, right? The other one is COMT, or COMT, and it helps to break down neurotransmitters and estrogens, which increase histamine. So it can, you know, correlate to PMS, mood shifts, and histamine-related migraines. And then we have MAO, which was monoamine oxidase, and it degrades histamine indirectly via amine pathways. So basically, if we're looking at this, it also processes dopamine, serotonin. So MAO variants can amplify neuroinflammation and mood instability. So we think about that. We think about, you know, so much of what we struggle with as a society right now, with, you know, the anxiety and the depression and you know, these mood disorders. What if it's histamine intolerance, right? What if it's just, and it's not just, but what if we have the ability to support this MAO enzyme, and that can help us with these disorders? So again, lots of layers, but you know, if we start to look deeper, do we have the ability, again, which of course we do, to support the body as opposed to suppressing the symptom, right? Doesn't mean that we don't want symptom suppression to a degree. We've got to be able to live life. But we want to make sure, though, that if we are suppressing symptoms, that we're also trying to understand why it's happening in the first place. Because there's always that downstream effect of suppressing symptoms with drugs. Drugs have a place, certainly. But hopefully we'll get to where they're used less and less, depending on the situation, of course. So let's see. This is an interesting one, going back to estrogen itself. Estrogen increases histamine production and reduces DAO. So then we have these PMS flare-ups that can really make a lot of sense. So think about this, going back to our toxic load, right? So if we're struggling, if we're dealing with toxins that are these endocrine disruptors that are pushing. So I've said this before. Let me kind of take it back a step. So estrogen mimickers, or xenoestrogens, are exogenous estrogens that come in via, you know, food, pesticides, herbicides, toxins in the environment, toxins that we're cleaning our homes with, and, you know, the fragrances and all of those things that we've already talked about. The those bind to our estrogen receptor sites. So we have estrogen receptor sites on every cell of the body, men and women alike. And so when estrogen binds to the xenoestrogens bind to those estrogen receptor sites, then our own natural endogenous estrogen can't do its job. So hormones are communicators, right? They're telling the body what to do. And so the body, the cells are all plugged up with these xenoestrogens, and it's like, I don't know what to do, and I don't know what you're trying to tell me. And so it throws hormones way off. Men, women, kids, you name it, throws our hormones way off. And so if we are struggling with these mad PMS flare-ups, which lots of people are, could it then be, again, going back to too much estrogen due to hormonal imbalances, but also the exogenous xenoestrogens, which is increasing histamine production and decreasing DAO. And think about this too, is you go in and you have other things going on. You've got the leaky gut going on and the leaky brain going on, right? So you can see how, and I see it in my clients and patients all the time, how we just start to spiral. And we gotta figure out how to stop that and support the body so the spiral is no longer out of control. Because I can see the out of control in so many people. It's a tough one. Okay. And so yeah, there's a quote here that I like. It's not about removing every trigger, it's about lowering the total load and increasing your body's capacity, which is kind of what I just said, right? We don't have to do it all, but we unload the bucket, right? So it's not spilling over anymore. At least get to that point, and we start to manage the symptoms that are kicking our tails. Okay, so things that I want to talk about as far as what we can do to restore resilience, what we can do to manage these flares, and so sure, we can do a low histamine diet. There are lots of diets out there. To me, the word diet is therapeutic, right? A low histamine diet is not long term. I don't want it to be long term. I don't like to have people be that strict with their diet for any reason. Sometimes it has to happen, and sometimes it has to happen for shorter or longer terms. It just depends on the situation and the person. But there are good, healthy foods that are either they increase histamine or they're histamine liberators, or they have their histamine in the food or they're liberators, which means that when you eat them, it liberates histamines in the body. And so I'm going to jump down real quick and talk about a couple of these foods. So the things that I think is important to consider is high histamine foods. So if you're just trying to manage symptoms for a while, right, you're in a flare, you're trying to figure out the things that are foods that are high in histamine themselves: aged cheeses, fermented vegetables, vinegar-based condiments, cured meats, smoked and canned fish, alcohol, tomatoes, avocado, eggplant, spinach, dried fruits, citrus fruits. What's not on here, though, is leftovers. So a lot of people who have histamine intolerance can't do even 24-hour-old food. It's got to be fresh every time. So that's a hard one. It's a hard one for a lot of people. And some of these foods here, they're not healthy foods anyway, but knowing what they are, I think is important for helping to manage, right? And again, it's not intended to be long-term. And then we have histamine liberators. And so these are foods that trigger a release of histamine in the body. Even if they themselves are low in histamines, they still trigger. So we've got strawberries, pineapple, banana, papaya, shellfish, egg whites, chocolate, and cocoa, nuts, specifically cashews, peanuts, walnuts, alcohol, and artificial additives and preservatives. And so those are things that we can look at cutting out to start to try to manage. Let's see, where was it? There we go. Manage symptoms while we're getting control of what the underlying cause of the response is in the body anyway. So of course, I mean, I think this is a given. We talked enough about gut health, but restoring gut health, restoring the gut lining, right? And so how do we do that? It's not simple. certainly not simple. There are lots of reasons why the gut lining is not functioning, right? So yes, zonulin, but what's pushing zonulin to be elevated in the first place, right? So things we want to look at. We want to look at the microbiome. We want to look at our stress. We want to look at the food that we're eating, the unhealthy fats and oils. We want to look at potential for parasites and worms, toxic load, mycotoxins, these things that we have already sort of talked about that can impair gut function, the vagus nerve. All of those things can impair the impaired gut function. The thing that we've got to remember too, though, is there is a strategic method behind how we do this. We can't just go in and say, glutamine. Glutamine is a really important amino acid to the enterocytes, which is our gut cells. Really important. Those enterocytes use more glutamine than any other amino acid that we take in. Not everybody, though, can take glutamine for multiple reasons, genetic reasons as well. But we can't just try to heal the gut without eliminating the microbes that might be creating a problem, the infection that might be creating the problem, the toxins that might be creating the problem, right? We can't just lower can't just lower zonulin and assume that it's going to stay low. We have to address all of the things. So we do it in a strategic, manageable fashion so we can get rid of whatever is pushing the problem in the first place, microbes, toxins, mycotoxins, so forth. Try to then bring the zonulin levels down and restore gut health. You can also look at short chain fatty acids, which are super important to the functioning of the gut lining, as well as the microbiome. So we want to look at all of these things, and the beautiful thing is we can see so much of it in testing. It gives us so much information. Reduce your toxic load, address methylation imbalances, and fill in nutrient gaps. And so methylation is this really cool, super tricky pathway, metabolic pathway, essentially, that is, it plays a role in detoxification, it plays a role in health, in cellular health, and in the way cells function. It plays a role in, what was the third thing I was going to say? Genetic expression. It can play a role in there. And so there are things that, there's the MTHFR, this MTAR and MTRR, and there are a whole host of these variants or enzymes that can affect methylation. And so methylation can impact homocysteine levels. We don't often test homocysteine levels, but we should. I do it on pretty much everybody who comes through my doors. Super important. And a lot of times it's just based on nutrient deficiencies, right? And that could be based on genetic variants that don't allow for B12 to keep pushing on down the pathway or folate to push on down the pathway. So homocysteine rises and creates this inflammatory response instead of it being pushed on down. So I know that might not have made a lot of sense. I see it in my head because I talk about it all the time. But sometimes it is just as simple as, okay, and I need to take a methylated form of folate or a methylated form of B12 in order to make this happen, or I need to bring in the missing nutrient, trimethylglycine. That can help. So there are nutrients that can help with methylation, but of course we've got to know what it is. So that's where the testing can be such an amazing guide with this stuff. And then I think the other thing that is so often, it might be the first thing really that we should do, but it's addressing the nervous system. It's taking the time to, isn't this beautiful? We're going to end the show the way we kind of began it, but take the time to be grateful, to be calm, to meditate, to pray, right? To look around you for all the amazing things that you have, to be still when you're eating, to pray over your food, to smell your food, to taste your food, not eating on the run. This is all going back to vagal tone and supporting the vagus nerve, so it has the ability to move back and forth into the sympathetic, into the from the parasympathetic to the sympathetic when necessary, and then back to the sympathetic, right? We don't want to stay in the sympathetic. This is, again, it's the stress, it's the high cortisol, it's catabolic, it breaks down tissue, right, over time. But moving back into the parasympathetic, where we're calm and things are much easier, our bodies are calm. This is the place that we are meant to stay. And we often don't have the time, I say it all the time, right? But we often don't have the time to take the time to sit and be grateful, to go walk in the grass, or even go walk the dogs, walk barefoot. Again, the gratitude, prayer is huge. Reading the Bible is huge. All of these things are going to calm the nervous system, which will calm the histamine response. It's a hard thing, and I get this, when you're already in the middle of the struggle and somebody tells you, just go meditate. I know that that's not the thing that people want to hear, but it's a part of the healing process. It's a part of what the body needs. It's just like taking a supplement. It's just like the other things that we're trying to do. It's just like ridding the body of toxins. Calming the mind and bringing this in as a part of the health journey is really, really important. And we've got to make that front of mind. It's not just back here somewhere, right? We have to take care of ourselves mentally and emotionally in order for the body to repair physically. It's just kind of the way it works. So let's see, I love this. This is another one. So the real solution isn't to run from histamine, it's to rebuild the capacity to process it. And that's really what it comes down to. Sounds simple, not so simple, but that is the case. So I think that's kind of where we are. I think just taking to heart more than anything that anything that you're struggling with is a symptom of something that's deeper, and we need to have the curiosity to want to understand what the body's telling us, right? It's like so often we live in this place where we're disconnected from our body. We don't know how to listen to it. We don't know what it's trying to tell us. And so finding someone who can help guide you if this is what you need, help guide you in helping you learn how to hear your body. What's it trying to tell you? What are the symptoms coming from? Sometimes it's simple and sometimes it's not, and it's multifaceted and multi-layered, and it's really difficult. It can be really, really difficult, but there are answers and there are ways of unwinding it. And don't ever let somebody tell you that there's not. Don't ever let someone tell you that you just have histamine intolerance and that's just the way that it is and it's how you're made, right? But I would say that across the board, for most conditions that are not true genetic conditions, which is 95, 96, 97% of our conditions that we struggle with today are not genetic conditions. They can be epigenetic, right? We can have variants that push us toward a potential, but again, going back to it, it's epigenetic. So meaning then that we have a huge say in that expression. So, which means also that we can rewind it, right? When it's an epigenetic expression, we can rewind that. So we can calm the histamine intolerance. We can calm the other side of that, which is the mast cell activation syndrome, probably a whole other show, or the other symptoms that we're dealing with. We can calm, we can mitigate, we can reverse all of these things, right? By making decisions, finding someone who can help us make decisions. So I think I will stop there. This is always a really fun, topic for me. It's fun when I get to just chat with you by myself. But you can find me, of course, on Taste Life Nutrition and the website, all of the socials. Would love if you have questions. Happy to answer any questions that you have. You can also fill out a form on the website that will take you straight to me. It's just a quick assessment of things that might be a challenge for you, and I'll see if I might be able to help you. And then we're always here. Thursday, 10 a.m. Mountain Time, streaming live on KUHSdenver.com, the stream, and always having a good time. So we'll see you next week, Thursday, 10 a.m. Everybody have a good week, good weekend. We'll see you then.